Going to quickly show how to deal with some things, or what happens when we click on the object menu and the effect menu up here. The object menu has some very straightforward things. For instance, if I go to transform, I can rotate. We know that we can rotate just by mousing over around the corner, as long as we have our selection tool, our black tool, and we can do things like that. But what if we want it to be perfectly 180 degrees, perfectly upside down? Well, then we can go to Object Transform Rotate. We can just type in 180 degrees, and now it's completely upside down perfectly. If you try to rotate it by hand like that, it might not be as exact as you might think. Couple of other things that we have here. We can just do a couple of other things. We can do expand, right? The same thing we could do by clicking up here, which is going to allow us to change our all of our colors. It's going to separate everything into colors. Some interesting other things is that we can do a couple of the things we did in Photoshop. Like, let's say we want to warp our image. We want to kind of push and pull it to kind of warp it around something. Not that that would apply to Godzilla here, but I could go into what's called envelope distort. And there's a difference here between warping and mesh. So making with a warp will basically give us the options that we had when we warped something in Photoshop, which is basically we can choose all of these sort of presets, flags and arcs and arches and whatnot. It might take a second for this to kind of catch up with itself. It does not cooperating here. There we go. It's finally catching up. And then I could change the horizontal and the vertical and do all this. So basically, these are sort of preset warps. However, I'm going to cancel that. If I want to manually warp it, think back to the tutorial I did with Photoshop with the flag in the surreal landscape where I kind of pushed that flag around and made it look all wavy. That's going to be Object Envelope Distort Make with Mesh. We're basically going to put a mesh over top of this, and then we can kind of click around and push it and do things, anything that we want with it. And here we get to choose how many rows and columns do we want the mesh to be. And you can basically make it any number of rows and columns. You can click preview if you kind of want to see what that's going to look like. But once we do that, we have all of these anchors now that we can push and pull. But since we're dealing with anchors, we have to use the white direct selection tool to select and manipulate them. For instance, if I click on this anchor to select it, now I can click and drag it and warp it out that way. I could click on this anchor and kind of drag it over here. I could click on the handles and just like the things that you might have done with your logo. And you can basically kind of warp things by hand here. Looks kind of weird. However, it's something that you may want to do at some point. I'm just going to back up. It's not going to take too long to do that. Anyway, a couple of other things you can explore under the object, but those are probably going to be some of the things that you're going to, some of the things that might be kind of interesting. The other thing is the effect menu. And basically, the things that we want to, I really want to look at here are some of the effects that we used to have in Photoshop are here. So the artistic filters like dry brush, palette knife, all of these different things that we can add. We can pixelate, we can distort things and do different brush strokes and whatnot. That is all here. And we could basically go to poster edges and do this. We might have to zoom in. It's looking pretty blurry, but here I can change the level of posterization and all that. Looks like it got kind of pixelated, but that is just that effect. When I zoom in, it's still going to be, even though it looks pixelated, it's still very crisp and clear pixels. We could do this before or after we image trace something. So this has been image traced. The building in the background has not been image traced. I'm just going to get rid of this so we can see. But I can click on the building in the background that is still a raster pixel-based image. And I could go to the effect here, and I could come into the this gallery and do the same thing. And I could turn this into a posterized version. And then I could still image trace it if I want to after that. So you can kind of do this in whatever order you want. Because of the default colors here, you're not really seeing the results of the posterization. But if I change to more colors, it's probably going to be a little bit more noticeable. So basically, we have some of the same effects that we had built into Photoshop. However, in Photoshop, they were called filters, and in Illustrator, they're called effects. Kind of some interesting things that can change the way your images and objects inside of Illustrator work. Most of those don't necessarily allow you to change the colors and things that I addressed in that other video, but it can definitely change sort of the style of the artwork that you're using.